Welcome. This is the second lecture of the series on the universal wisdom in the Egyptian African tradition. First, maybe a short recap of what we discussed last week on sources of knowledge of ancient Egypt. Egyptian culture derived its profound knowledge and wisdom from two waves of immigration from Atlantis and one more recent wave from South India. The basic principles of ancient Egyptian culture are identical to those of Theosophy and were taught in the various mystery schools. This superior knowledge is illustrated, among other things, by the remarkable facts concerning the construction of the Great Pyramid, and I showed you some examples of that. Today we will discuss the interior of the Great Pyramid as we delve into the mystical relationship between the Great Pyramid and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And as mentioned last week, the religion of ancient Egypt was based on the premise of eternal life. This was expressed, among other things, in the many mythological stories, such as those of Osiris and Isis, and the stories about life after death, as described in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The key to understanding these stories lies in the mystical side of Egyptian religion. And that same mystical key also provides greater clarity about the true function of the Great Pyramid. Today's lecture is divided in 3 blocks with the following topics. The first block is about the Great Pyramid as a simulator and temple for initiation. The second block about the mystical relationship between the Great Pyramid and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, part 1, and part 2 continues with the same topic. So first, the Great Pyramid as a simulator and temple for initiation. We will first consider the concepts of mysticism and initiation, as these are key to understanding ancient Egyptian culture. What is mysticism? What makes a person a mystic? First of all, the strongly living intuitive realization that one's spiritual source lies within oneself and not outside of oneself. And further, the mystic's constant effort to realize unity with one's spiritual source to make it a reality. Or, as the Egyptians said, to allow the inner Osiris to be born within you. And this can happen in 2 ways. Gradually, through life after life, in interaction with others around you, working on refining your character, or accelerated. This means that you bring all the noble qualities within yourself to fruition at an accelerated pace, while simultaneously coming to terms with the less noble qualities that also emerge. And based on a strong spiritual will, you choose from the motive of compassion for all life to embark on the accelerated path of evolutionary development known as initiation. What is initiation? Initiation means beginning to develop the noble faculties inherent in our consciousness in the loving, compassionate part of it. It is the inner path which is connected to the processes of initiation, the many degrees, and the requirements imposed on the initiant, which are also found in the core of the teachings of all great religions and philosophies. The purpose of initiation is, by accelerating the development of wisdom within yourself, you are better able to help others develop wisdom within themselves. In all major cultures, there have been stories of heroes and sages who successfully completed the process of initiation, which bear a striking resemblance. For example, the legends of the lives of Krishna, Hercules, Pythagoras, Buddha, and Jesus. They are all presented as divinely conceived saviors. Going the path of initiation is closely linked to knowledge of the mysteries of life, which was taught in the so-called mystery schools of old. The mysteries, in historical times, were what remained of the knowledge and wisdom of humanity's divine ancestors regarding the mysteries of the cosmos and of human nature, and the idea that the deepest core of the cosmos and human beings is identical, namely divine. The mysteries serve primarily to teach people moral principles for right living and to foster a hopeful expectation of life after death. The mysteries were divided into two general groups, the lesser and the greater mysteries. The lesser mysteries consisted of symbolic and dramatic performances for the general public, in which, among other things, the profound symbolism of publicly known mythology was used to transfer wisdom. The greater mysteries consisted primarily of the study of esoteric knowledge and wisdom shared in a close, trusted circle, such as the meaning of the mythologies of the ancient religions. The accuracy of this esoteric explanation was later confirmed by actual experience in the higher initiations. In preparation for this personal experience, training methods were used to simulate the situations to which the aspirant would be exposed during these higher initiation. Just as an airplane pilot today first practices on a flight simulator. In the case of ancient Egypt, this also applied to the initiate. We will soon see the Great Pyramid can therefore be seen partly as a simulator for the initiate. What further information about initiation is relevant to today's topic? Theosophy distinguishes 7 main stages of initiation. The first 3 consist of the study of esoteric teachings, aspiration, and the proper conduct of life. The intended end result is purification, the practice of discipline, and the realization of spiritual tranquility through control of the mind. The ancient Greeks called this process collectively catharsis, purification. From the 4th initiation onward, there is the gaining of first-hand experience at other planes of existence, because you learn by experiencing. For the ancient Egyptians, the death of Osiris and his resurrection symbolized the process of initiation. The purpose of initiation was, and still is, to transform an earthly mortal being into a divine imperishable being. By developing the 4 inner Osiris aspects within yourself, and they were called Osiris Typhon, Osiris Lunus, Osiris Horus, and Osiris Ptah. The 4 higher initiation differ from each other in purpose and characteristics. They are in fact 4 phases of inner growth comparable to the phases we experience within a single incarnation: birth and childhood, youth and young adulthood, the full blossoming of adulthood, and inner withdrawal and old age. In Theosophy, these are successively referred to as mystic birth, great temptation, great renunciation, and great passing. Due to time constraints, we will only briefly discuss some aspects of each of the initiation within the context of today's theme. Now let us again look at the Great Pyramid. I briefly recap some conclusions from last week. Who built the Great Pyramid? The answer was by immigrants from Atlantis from Poseidonis. When was the pyramid built? Not 4,600 years ago, but over 80,000 years ago, according to Theosophy. How was the pyramid built? With knowledge of mathematics, pi and phi, the golden ratio, I showed you last week. With knowledge of rocks and how to construct with them. With knowledge of Earth's geometry, knowledge of physics, etc., and also use of white magic. The next question is, why was the Great Pyramid built? For what purpose? There has always been much debate about the purpose and function of the Great Pyramid. Broadly speaking, there are two main hypotheses. The first one is that of a tomb, and the second one that of initiation temple. Let's first look at the hypothesis of a tomb. There are some remarkable points. Inside the Great Pyramid is a sarcophagus, and this sarcophagus was empty, nothing in it, and a lid of the sarcophagus was never found. And this also applies to other pyramids. Also, always was the sarcophagus empty. The second point is that no hieroglyphs were found in the Pyramid of Cheops, unlike in other structures, except on one of the stones above the so-called King's Chamber, out of sight, where a cartouche with rough red paint bearing the name Cheops was found. Now this in itself still leaves plenty of room for various conclusions, namely that the tomb hypothesis is indeed correct, or Cheops is the old name of the pyramid itself, adopted by Pharaoh Cheops, or the name Cheops was added by one of the various pyramid researchers in the 19th century, for instance, Colonel Weiss and other ones. Conclusion: the hypothesis of tomb leaves many questions unanswered and does not do justice to the many remarkable facts surrounding the pyramid. The second hypothesis, that of an initiation temple. The facts point in the direction that the pyramid was deliberately built with extensive knowledge of engineering, astronomy, mathematics, etc. Theosophy and a few scientists, such as Peter Le Mesurier, therefore argue that the Great Pyramid was built as an initiation temple. Moreover, some scientists, such as Adams in the late 19th century, have argued that the Great Pyramid represents the same as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Why is the hypothesis that the Great Pyramid is an initiation temple not considered by many scientists? We believe this is because the scientists focus exclusively on the material side of life, and therefore also of the pyramid. And in doing so, they rather easily ignore the clues found, for example, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. According to Theosophy, regarding the pyramid, the builders were initiates who possessed extensive knowledge, and the knowledge embedded in the structure, such as astronomical knowledge, is related to the cycles of initiation. Also, these initiation no longer take place in the Great Pyramid for a long time now. The hypothesis that the Great Pyramid was a temple of initiation aligns with the teachings about Atlantis, namely that its builders were people of a different type. In this lecture, we will now proceed with the hypothesis that the Great Pyramid was indeed built as a temple of initiation. From this premise, we will give an impression of the significance of the various passages, corridors, rooms, and spaces within the pyramid. Let's make a quick and brief exploration of the inside of the Great Pyramid. And I will discuss further details later on. We will see here this diagram, and the cross-section is as follows. First, there is a downward corridor, 50 to 60 meters long, about 1.5 meters high, and this corridor leads to a chamber located in the bedrock, which is underneath the construction of the Great Pyramid. And this chamber is called in Theosophy the chamber of chaos, or the hall of ordeal of matter. This is how we are going to call it for the rest of the lecture. Then upwards, when we go back on this downward corridor, there is a crossing, and via a steep shaft we can see a passage going upwards, which is called the ladder of the soul. This steep shaft reaches upwards into a cavern called the Well of Deep Waters. The vertical shaft ends in a gallery called the Double Hall of Truth, or the Great Gallery. From there is a horizontal passage to the Queen's or Moon Chamber. And from this crossing, there also goes a road upwards through the Great Gallery, and then via a narrow passage to the King's Chamber, which contains the sarcophagus. As mentioned, we now assume that the Great Pyramid was built to serve a function in the preparation of initiation and of the actual initiation process. This means that the initiant will leave his physical body behind for a few days to experience the processes of initiation with the inner parts of his nature. And in doing so, he will self-consciously, in full waking consciousness, experience the processes of death, and through direct experience, gain knowledge of other planes of existence in our solar system. More on this later. But before that happens, the initiant will undergo a training to prepare for that initiation. The function of the Great Pyramid is also that of a great simulator. The initiant will experience a symbolic simulation of the processes of initiation into the greater mysteries within its physical body by navigating the various corridors and chambers of the pyramid, just as a pilot first learns the basics of flying in a flight simulator. Let's look at the cross-section again. The various corridors, chambers, and rooms represent states of consciousness within the initiant, which they will need to pay particular attention to. If we go first have a look at the hall of ordeal of matter, so in the bedrock underneath the Great Pyramid, then the process in the consciousness of the initiant that is evoked is that he has to learn to see through the illusory nature of the material world. And the purpose of that training is to control detachment to matter. Then another process, another phase of the initiation concerns the processes that take place in the Queen's or Moon chamber, where the initiate is coming via the ladder of the soul and the well of the deep waters. It is about overcoming personal focus and learning to work with noble supra-personal powers. And the purpose is to control his conscience. Then the double hall of truth. There the process in the consciousness of the initiant focus on further development of discernment regarding truth and justice. It is about control of his intuition. And finally, the king's chamber, within it the sarcophagus, is in the consciousness of the initiants about the process of realizing a deep connection with his inner God. The purpose is the control of inspiration. So much for the first impression of the interior of the Great Pyramid. We go now to block 2 of the lecture, and we will focus on the mystical relationship between the Great Pyramid and the scriptures of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Now we move on to a first impression of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The term Egyptian Book of the Dead was introduced by the German scholar Lepsius in 1842, although it is not really a book, but it rather refers to various papyrus scrolls, funerary texts on walls in pyramid tombs, and on the walls of coffins. As I said before, the ancient Egyptians believed in eternal life. The Book of the Dead was at one point an essential part of the religion of ancient Egypt, which made it possible for not only the pharaoh but also other righteous people to hope for eternal life. The Book of the Dead was not a kind of Bible for the Egyptians. Several different isolated sayings were found in various sources. Some sayings were the same, while others were different and quite unique. Looking at all this from a theosophical perspective, we can say that the texts were intended to provide information for the deceased in the afterlife, but can also be interpreted as allusions to the initiation process. The Books of the Dead primarily date from the New Kingdom from around 1550 BC. The theme of the papyri can be translated as going forth by day, but can also be translated as entry into the light, and can be considered in one respect synonymous with the realization of inner enlightenment. The function of the Book of the Dead is therefore twofold. For the ordinary Egyptian, a description of planes of existence after death and how to act there, and for the initiate, a description of the transformation and testing of the soul during the process of initiation. All the figures, objects, and animals in the various plates, called vignettes, of the Book of the Dead, with the deceased or initiant, as the main figure, are amongst others symbols for the living beings and forces in the universe at different levels and aspects of human consciousness. The Book of the Dead is an allegory in this regard. Over time, many different versions of the Book of the Dead emerged. The most extensive version is the Papyrus of Ani, a scribe at the pharaoh's court from the 19th dynasty, approximately 1215 BC. The papyrus is 26 meters long and has been translated by various Egyptologists, including Wallace Budge and Raymond Faulkner. The Papyrus of Ani contains 189 chapters and 37 plates. Today we will make use of this Papyrus of Ani. Because the ancient Egyptians believed in eternal life, the goal of every believer was to obtain a new life after death. In most cases, this was understood as a new life in the other world, the afterlife, that is, the various states after death, which were referred to with the collective term as amenti. Furthermore, some also possessed knowledge of the process of initiation, and at some point the degenerate idea took hold among these people that initiation, or Osirification as they called it, would occur automatically after death for the average Egyptian. However, according to esoteric teachings, this is not the case. The esoteric origin of the idea of a new life in the Book of the Dead was that it was an initiation story. The mummy represented the body of the initiant who left it at the beginning of a major initiation. Meanwhile, the spiritual part of the initiant's soul underwent a process of spiritual transformation. The resurrected deceased thus says in one of the ancient scriptures the following: I have been spiritualized. I am become a soul. I rise as a god. This text reflects the ancient Egyptians' knowledge of the initiation process. The Book of the Dead can therefore also be considered as a guide to initiation. We have now reached a point where, based on the knowledge of Theosophy, we will explore the correspondence, the mystical relationship, that is the inner meaning for the initiant's consciousness, between the symbolism of the chambers and passages in the Great Pyramid and the symbolism in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which serves as a kind of guide, providing further background insights into the process of initiation. Regarding the Great Pyramid, it is important to realize that the various chambers and corridors play a primary role in the preparation and training that precedes the actual initiation process. The Great Pyramid is used as a simulator in this training. The King's Chamber is the location where the actual initiations into the great mysteries took place. It is the Holy of Holies of the Great Pyramid. Furthermore, there are 4 higher phases or degrees of initiation, each with a different character. Each initiation involves a repetition of process steps, with each subsequent initiation representing an increasingly deeper step of development. We will now gradually explore the mystical relationship between Theosophy, the Great Pyramid, and the Book of the Dead by showing for each characteristic phase of initiation, the correspondences between the chambers and corridors in the pyramid, and some selected texts and plates from the Egyptian Book of the Dead on initiation. We first will have a look at the initiation of the mystic birth. During the initiation of the mystic birth, the initiant must demonstrate his detachment from the material world. Just as at various points in life, during the initiation, the initiant evaluates and judges his own moral and mental quality and draws conclusions, viewed from a higher part of his consciousness. This successful initiation is called Epiphany in Theosophy. The initiate is briefly illuminated by a divine being. In the Great Pyramid, the process is symbolized and the training takes place in the hall of ordeal of matter. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, this initiation process is described as the weighing of the heart. If the initiant succeeds, he has realized that part of his inner nature that the Egyptians called Osiris Typhon. Let's have a more detailed look inside the pyramid. You see here again the cross-section. The initiant goes down the corridor with his guide. See the white arrow. He will enter the hall of ordeal of matter alone and in the dark. In the next slide here you see the corridor going down, and again you see looking from inside out how this looks like. In the next slide you see the entrance to the hall of ordeal of matter. Here you see a sketch of the cross-section of the hall of ordeal of matter. At the right-hand side is the entrance to the hall. In the next slide you see a photo of the hall of ordeal of matter, and in the middle the pit. The symbolism of this hall of ordeal of matter is as follows. It symbolizes the coarseness of the manifested world, coarse, illusory, and easily disintegrating. The floor of this hall used to be very rough. Now it is plastered with cement so tourists can easily walk on it. The test of this hall is, can the initiant always control himself? At the right-hand side of this photo, you see a fence before the pit. And please note, the initiant is there in the pitch dark. At the back of the photo, you see another fence, and that is a dead-end way. And you must realize that if the initiant was in this hole, he could easily fall, for instance, in the pit. It was also called the pit of forgetfulness. And also, by losing his correct orientation, he could end up in the opposite corridor and think that he has found his way back. But it was a dead-end way. So, was the initiant able to find his way back in a controlled manner? That was the question. Then we will have a look at the Book of the Dead that is also concerning this part of the initiation process. In the Book of the Dead, man is symbolically represented in his dual nature as Ani and his wife Tutu. Ani symbolizes the spiritual, creative element, and Tutu represents Ani's personality. Ani and Tutu enter the hall of Maat, the double hall of justice, for the weighing of the heart. This hall houses the Council of 12 Gods of Osiris. The initiant's heart is weighed against the feather of truth, symbolized by an ostrich feather which is very light. The heart symbolizes the purity of his consciousness and must be as light as the feather for admission to the rest of the initiations. In plate 3 we see also the following. Anubis with the jackal head checking whether the scales are in equilibrium. He represents the guide, the Hierophant, during the initiation. Anubis is represented in mythology as the planet Mercury, the planet closest to the sun. Mercury could be called the helper or protector of the sun. Then we see the god Thoth on the right. He is the keeper of the gods' books. He is assisted by the dog-headed monkey atop of the scale. On his palette, the god Thoth records the outcome of the weighing of the heart. Then we have at the right Amit, the eater of the dead, who symbolizes the accuser, who is aware of the evil deeds committed by Ani. In Isis Unveiled, Madame Blavatsky writes more specifically that Amit symbolizes Typhon as the accuser. The initiant is tested for evil, or rather, his focus on the physical, material, and the desire aspect of his nature. If the initiant is not yet in harmony with the universal laws, he fails. Then Amit, so Typhon, the lower nature, is given control of the heart. The symbolic meaning of this is that the higher being within the human being, his conscience, realizes then that he has failed. It is therefore understandable that Ani utters the following prayer, and I quote, "My heart, my mother, my heart, my mother, my heart whereby I came into being, may not stand up to oppose me at my judgment. May there be no opposition to me in the presence of the Cha-Cha chiefs. May there be no separation between you, that is my heart, and me, in the presence of him who operates the balance scale. The Cha-Cha chiefs are the 4 sons of the initiants who symbolize Ani's karma." In the next plate 4 we see the following. Horus and Ani approach the throne of Osiris, referred to as Unifer. Horus symbolizes the higher nature of man, Buddhimanas, his heart, the son of the inner god Osiris. He is the opponent of Typhon. Horus wears the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Horus says, "I have come to you, O Unifer," so that is Osiris, "and I have brought unto you the Osiris Ani. His heart is righteous, and it had come forth from the balance. It had not sinned against any god or goddess. And let him appear in the presence of the god Osiris, and let him be like the followers of Horus forever and ever." End of quote. Next, we see Ani kneeling before Osiris, wearing a white wig to signify that his consciousness has been found to be pure. The crown on Ani's head symbolizes his inner spiritual power. In Buddhism, it is referred to as Usnisha. Ani offers his acquired powers to Osiris. Seated before the throne, Ani is illuminated by the god Osiris. In Theosophy, this is called Epiphany. The initiate has defeated Typhon. He has mastered his lower physical nature and has realized Osiris Typhon. Then we go to the next initiation. The initiation of the Great Temptation is the period of the mystical youth. During the initiation of the Great Temptation, the initiant must demonstrate that he has mastered his lower nature, his moon nature, and that he always acts according to his conscience. In the words of the voice of the silence, before that path is entered, thou must destroy thy lunar body, cleanse thy mind body, and make clean thy heart. End of quote. Success in this initiation is called theophany in Theosophy. The initiate meets his own inner God face to face, temporarily. He becomes one with it. It also signifies that his mouth is opened, meaning that he can gain experience as a teacher. In the Book of the Dead, this initiation is described as the journey through the underworld through Amenti, and more specifically, that part of the astral sphere, the sphere of desires, in the Theosophy called Kamaloka. Let us look at the pyramid again. Here you see again cross-section. The initiant ascends from the crossroad via the ladder of the soul to the well of the deep waters. And here you see a photo of the entrance of the ladder of the soul. It is the symbol, the ladder of the soul, of the inner part within man. The key of the inner path is forget your personality, focused on your lower self. Along the way, the initiant passes the well of deep waters, the symbol of the astral world, specifically the part called Kamaloka, the sphere of desire. It is an invisible sphere that envelopes our physical earth. Then the initiant climbs up via a very steep and narrow passage to the top and reaches the upper exit of the ladder of the soul. Then he goes through a horizontal corridor to the entrance of the Queen's or Moon Chamber, which represents the sphere of personal passions. In this slide, at the right-hand side, you see a small fence which is indicating the entrance to the Queen or Moon Chamber. To find your way to the Moon Chamber, you have to bend down deeply because the corridor is not very high. In the Queen's Chamber is a symbol, a niche with 5 steps, symbolizing 5 of the 7 sacred planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury. And the Moon Chamber itself symbolizes the sphere of the moon. These relate to the principles of human consciousness, which play an important role during the initiation process. We go to plate number 7 of the Book of the Dead. Ani must demonstrate his mastery of his lower nature. He plays the game Senet against his higher self. Senet means passage, with the main goal being to reach Osiris at the other side of the board game. It symbolizes the inner struggle to realize the inner Osiris within yourself. In plate 7, we see also the two lions, which are the guardians of the gateways to the underworld. They are called yesterday and tomorrow. And the initiate Ani must realize that he is the result of his own past and that the future lies within this past. Therefore, he gives the following password: I am yesterday and I know tomorrow. In the detail from plate 15 of the Book of the Dead, we see this successful initiation of the Great Temptation depicted by the Shem priests opening of the mouth of the initiate with the so-called Urheka. Urheka means great of words, great of influence. This signifies the beginning of the initiate's teaching. He has realized Osiris Lunas. We now move on to block 3, part 2 of the mystical relationship between the Great Pyramid and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Then we go to the initiation of the Great Renunciation. It is the period of the mystical maturity. The initiate abandons all hope of individual advancement. His sole purpose is to be a savior and a teacher of his fellow human beings. The initiate is tested on his ability to control his intuition. Success in initiation is called Theosophy in Theosophy. The inner God breathes into the initiate for a short or long period of time. In the Great Pyramid, the process is symbolized in the double hall of truth. In the Book of the Dead, this is indicated by the possession of the Eye of Horus, or the realization of Osiris Horus. Let us look inside the pyramid again. First, the cross-section. We have now arrived at the Grand Gallery, also called the Double Hall of Truth. Next, you see a photo of the Grand Gallery. This hall corresponds to the Hall of Maat in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It is called the Hall of Double Truth and Justice because the initiate is tested for righteousness with regard to the Earth sphere and with regard to the cosmic sphere, and particularly the spiritual realms, so that inspiration through the initiate flows into the earthly sphere. The hall has enormous dimensions. The wall contains 7 steps in the wall on either side and relate to the 7 cosmic realms of consciousness and matter, the sevenfold composition of every being, the 7 sacred planets, and the 7 stages of initiation. Before actually entering in the king's chamber, he is faced with the question whether his heart is in alignment with cosmic life. And the balance is again determined. His heart is again weighed. What is the corresponding part in the Book of the Dead? In the Book of the Dead, a similar scene can be found in the Hall of Maat, where 42 gods are depicted. They symbolize the higher qualities of the initiate. He must address all 42 gods, recounting what he has actually not done or has ceased to do. For instance, part of the text reads as follows: I have committed no iniquities. I have not committed violence. I have not stolen. I have neither killed nor hurt. I have not made false sacrifices. I have not neglected my duties. I have not spoken lies. I have not caused suffering. I have not been the cause of shedding tears. I have not closed my ears to words of right and truth, etc. A total of 42 of these statements. And the text is usually called the negative confession, or alternatively, the declaration of innocence. It is the ethical code for human conduct according to the Egyptian tradition and is identical with that of other moral traditions in the world. Finally, on the far right stands Thoth, the scribe who pronounces and records the judgment. In the case of the initiate, everything appears to be in order, for Thoth says, "Let the Osiris go. You see he is without fault. He lived on truth. He has fed on truth. The god has welcomed him as he desired. He has given food to my hungry, drink to my thirsty ones, clothes to my naked ones. He has made the sacred food of the gods the meat of the spirits." And these texts are almost identical to those in the Bible, Matthew 25, verse 35 to 36. However, the texts from the Book of the Dead are much older. In plate 16, we see Ani sitting before an offering table with the crown on it and a staff in his hand. Ani says, "The spiritual forces fall headlong in the darkness, but the eye of Horus has made me holy, and the god Upati, the opener of the way, had nursed me." The eye of Horus indicates the mastery of Buddhimanas, the intuition. And further, "In very truth, I am Ra himself. I am crowned upon my throne like the king of the gods." End of quote. From this all, it is clear Ani has realized Osiris Horus. Finally, we go to the last and highest initiation. During the initiation of the Great Passing, the initiant is tested in realizing the spiritual divine aspects of his nature. He has become the channel of inspiration from his inner God. In the Great Pyramid, this process is symbolized in the king's chamber and specifically by the sarcophagus, in which the initiate's body is located during the actual initiation. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, this is addressed during the journey through the spiritual realms. If he succeeds, he has realized Osiris Ptah. He has become one with his inner God. He has become like Ptah. In Theosophy, this is called Theopathy. He has become one with his inner God. And he then returns to earth as a spiritual teacher with the inspiring message that every human being has the potential to realize the inner Osiris, the inner God within himself, through self-directed evolution. Let us have a last look inside the pyramid. We first see a photo of the high step to the king's chamber's entrance. The initiant proceeds using a very high step to the narrow entrance to the king's chamber. Of course, the symbol is very clear. It is a big step to actually go through the process of initiation. In the next slide, you see on the left side a sketch of the cross-section of the king's chamber and the entrance to the king's chamber. On the right side, you see a photograph of the rebates for the 3 stone trapdoors in the king's chamber's entrance. In the next slide, we see the king's chamber entrance, but from a view from inside. If the initiant has acquired the right to undergo the initiation, the right to enter the king's chamber, he may proceed. And note, the room can only be entered by crawling through the entrance corridor. Next, we see a photo of the west corner of the king's chamber plus the sarcophagus. The beautifully finished space of the king's chamber exudes an atmosphere of purity because the walls are of smoothly polished granite. The joints are clean and tight. It reflects the purity of heart required of the initiant, and the sarcophagus is the Holy of Holies of the pyramid. Here you see again the cross-section of the king's chamber. There are 5 chambers above the king's chamber. The lower chamber of the king's chamber represents the earth, and the 5 chambers above it represent again Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, Mercury, and Venus. And as mentioned, the queen's chamber symbolizes the moon. And finally, the inner divine nature of the initiate in the sarcophagus symbolizes the sun. In total, 7 spheres of consciousness corresponding to the 7 principles of human consciousness. Let us have a last look at the Book of the Dead. During the initiation of the Great Passing, the initiant is tested in realizing the spiritual, divine aspects of his nature. He becomes the channel of inspiration from his inner God. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, this is addressed during the journey through the spiritual realms. If he succeeds, he has realized Osiris Ptah. He has become one with his inner God. In Theosophy, this is called Theopathy. He then returns to earth as a spiritual teacher. We go to plate 27, the symbolism of the god Ptah. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Ani undergoes symbolic transformations into certain gods and animals, including the god Ptah. The name Ptah means he who opens. For example, Ptah was involved in the creation of the solar system. Regarding initiation, Madame Blavatsky says, Ptah is the first to unveil the face of the dead mummy to awaken the soul within its bosom. In the chronology of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the initiant Ani must demonstrate that he can control himself to such an extent that he can also enter higher spiritual realms of consciousness previously unknown to him, without being confused. The symbolic transformations described in the Book of the Dead provide clear indications of compassion as a motive for undertaking the initiation processes. For example, let us look at plate 28 and the text. Here Ani is transformed into the form of the god Nu and says, I am the girdle of the garment of the god Nu, which gives light and shines and belongs to his breast, the illuminer of the darkness. I have made to stand up the weeping ones, whose faces were covered over. They were in a helpless state of misery. End quote. The initiant states his goal as to help those who cry out of a state of misery and to bring light into the darkness. These and other texts express the desire to be a teacher for one's fellow human beings on earth. In other words, putting into practice the bodhisattva ideal. Compassion is the motive for undergoing the initiation processes. In plate 30, we see Ani standing before the throne of Osiris, offering sacrifices. He is offering what he has acquired, namely the realization of his divinity. He returns to his friends on earth as a teacher. In this plate, Ani has become equal to the gods Osiris, Ra, and Tem. He is Osiris Ptah. He has realized theopathy, the conscious entrance of his own inner God. Finally, for those who at that time has successfully completed the actual initiation in the Great Pyramid, saw, upon leaving the pyramid, the pole star, the pivot around which, as it were, everything revolves. I will give you now the complete overview of the lecture in this table, which is presented now. During this lecture, based on the knowledge of Theosophy, we outlined the correspondences, the mystical relationship that is the inner meaning for the initiant consciousness, between the symbolism of the chambers and corridors in the Great Pyramid for preparation for initiation, and the king's chamber with the sarcophagus as the Holy of Holies, where the initiant actually went through the higher initiation, and the symbolism in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which serves as a kind of guide providing further background insights into the process of initiation. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, we find traces of compassion as a motive for initiation, becoming a teacher to help people on earth flourish by bringing them spiritual light. This is the end of the lecture. We are now going to have a 3-minute break, and after we have answered the questions, we will have a short study of some 30 minutes. And if you want to join the study, you can still send an email to info@blavatskyhouse.org so you can join the study. See you within 3 minutes from now. Welcome back. Mariska, are there any questions?
Well, Joop, there's one question. I think the rest is coming to study with us later. The question is, you told us about the function of the pyramid and all the rooms. Are there similar buildings known that have a function as an initiation temple who have the same rooms in it?
Well, there are various structures in the world that are, according to, let's say, theosophical sources, but also to other researchers, have something to do with the process of initiation. First of all, I mentioned, I think, in the last lecture that the construction of pyramid-like structures was something that was characteristic for the peoples that moved from Atlantis to other parts of the world. So another example of pyramid building peoples is Middle and South America. I mentioned the example of Teotihuacan, the pyramid of the sun and the moon in Mexico. But also you find smaller types of pyramids, of course, in countries like Guatemala, the Maya culture, for instance. But there are also other types of structures, or let's say monuments, that have rooms in it that are really initiation rooms, so to speak. I forgot the name. There is another one in the south of Mexico. I can't remember the name at the moment, but that is also typically a monument that is an initiation room. But there are also in other continents, like for instance in Europe, there are locations like for instance Stonehenge is also considered such a one. Newgrange in Ireland is also such a structure. So there are many different types of structures other than pyramids, which are considered as being initiations, temples, where initiation really took place in former days, so to speak.
Well, thank you, Joop.
Yeah.
That was the question that was asked.
Okay. Thank you, Mariska. Thank you for the question. Then now it is time to move on to the study part of today, and we will give some. Next week we will go to the Hermetic tradition, and Lucas already referred to this. We will have a look at how this Hermetic tradition in Egypt came about. It's a long story of the history, but it's very interesting. And also, I will try to explain about the universality of this Hermetic tradition. And also, in the end, of course, I will try to summarize what the present day value of this Hermetic tradition is, because starting from the Renaissance, it became very important in Western culture. Many famous people like Piccola de Mirandola and Giordano Bruno and all kinds of other people like Paracelsus were very much interested in knowing about the Hermetic tradition. And they have influenced actually the mental currents in the West very much, I think. So hopefully you will be joining us next week, both in the lecture and in the studies, and hope to see you next week again. We will close the study by reading the Gayatri Mantra, and it runs as follows. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity, which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light.